anyone's speakers or something, but
Okay. Well, we ready to get started?
yes, I sure am.
So, hello and welcome to everybody for our April Cold Case Coalition volunteer training presentation. So tonight we're going to be doing an introduction to forensic investigative genetic genealogy, or FIGG for short. Our presenter today is going to be Allison Wild. She is a board member at the Cold Case Coalition and kind of started our genetic genealogy program there. And then she is also the director of forensic investigative genetic genealogy at Intermountain Forensics, which is our sister organization, which is a nonprofit forensic DNA lab. She is the person who is spearheading the genealogical research on our Tulsa 1921 graves project. And she may or may not mention that, but it's very cool. And she's doing amazing work on that. So as we go through, I'm going to hand over kind of the reins to Allison. If you have questions, we're going to hold those to the end, but if you need to, you can use the chat if there's something that you're just not understanding what's going on or we need some clarification, just quickly put in the chat. I'll try to keep monitoring that so that Allison doesn't have to do triple duty as she's presenting. So I think I've covered just about everything. And Allison, it's all over to you.
Okay, excellent. Hello and thank you. It's good to meet everybody. Debbie kind of already gave me an introduction, but just briefly so that you understand my background in genetic genealogy, I started DNA testing. I think the first DNA test that I worked with was maybe 2013, and then really in earnest starting in 2014. And then it kind of caught the bug and became just completely obsessed with it, which happens to most people, right? And then kind of just kept going. I had volunteered. I had a weekly volunteer slot at the local family history center, and I was the only person there under the age of 50, probably. Well, I'm older than 50 now, but I wasn't. I was younger than 50 then, and so I was the only person that really was delving into the DNA, and so I started teaching DNA classes there as I learned it myself, right? But since everyone was more beginner than I was, it was working out. So as I learned, I would help others learn, and was lucky enough to connect with a few other people early on that were doing a little bit in genetic genealogy. Somebody in my neighborhood is a biologist that was also trying to learn. That was great fun working with him a little bit. I opened my own genetic genealogy company in 2016. Here's a little tip for you. A lot of people say, how can I get paid to do genealogy work or genetic genealogy work or any type of research work, right? It's because I was volunteering at the Family History Center and meeting so many people. I would teach once a month, maybe. Well, for a while it was weekly, but once a month pretty regularly about some subject. But then I had like a little weekly 3-hour slot on Wednesdays, and people would come in and I would help them and get them started. We'd be to a really exciting part in their DNA research, and they'd say, oh my gosh, can I come back next Wednesday and we finish this? And I'd say, oh, the person that was here last week is coming back next week, so I can put you 2 weeks out or 3 weeks out. And then it started to back up that people would just say, can I just hire you to do this for me or coach me separately, stuff like that. So I felt really weird at first about being paid for it, because I tell people, are you sure? Well, I'm kind of new too. I've only been doing it a couple of years, and they're like, well, you're making progress, you know more than I do. So that's how I ended up with paid genetic genealogy clients. Then um, some of my genealogy clients had traditional genealogy companies that they had hired that weren't doing the DNA. As they shared the DNA results back with the traditional companies, I got more contract work from the traditional genealogy companies to pick up their genetic genealogy work. So I get asked that question a lot. How do I turn this into something I can get paid for? Volunteer somewhere so that people realize what you can do, and then they will offer to pay you for it. Okay, in terms of tonight's presentation, audience members here range from 0 experience in genealogy and 0 experience in DNA testing to somewhat experienced in either, to current FIGG practitioners. I see some of you on here that I'm like, I could learn from that person. So, I'm not sure if some of you will learn anything from this, but just be aware, our audience is broad tonight. So this is going to be an introduction and a broad overview of FIG. We'll also address opportunities to become involved in FIG, since I get asked that question a lot as well. How can I do that, either volunteer or paid? Um, Debbie kind of addressed this, but hold questions till the end. But especially if I misspeak on something, those of you that know in the field, maybe like put a correction in the chat, like she said this database and she meant that database. I know because I work in the field or whatever. Or if everybody's lost needs a clarification point, put something in there and Debbie will stop me. Okay, so what is FIG? FIG is basically just the use of genetic genealogy to identify DNA profiles of human remains or qualifying crime scene DNA, which is usually violent sexual assaults or homicides, is where you'll most often see it used. This is not going to be something that, well, maybe who knows what the future holds, but right now it's not something that can be used on like a property crime. Okay. So just realize it's not every crime scene that they can turn to this application. It has to be qualifying crimes. Sometimes you'll see it referred to as IgG, investigative genetic genealogy, or FGG, forensic genetic genealogy, or F/IgG. It's all the same thing. Sometimes you'll see it referred to as just FG, forensic genealogy, although technically that is a different field that's been around for a long time that doesn't have to involve DNA. That's more about researching errors that might inherit something. The word forensics in there because it's something that might go to court. So it's application of genealogy that's used in a courtroom setting. And third, and the most important thing that people not in this field don't really understand is that this is different from traditional forensic DNA services. So we're going to talk first about, kind of definitions now, like what is genetic genealogy then, and what is traditional forensic DNA services. So let's start pre-FIG work. Let's talk about the status of DNA in 2017. You had your genetic genealogy field and you had your forensic DNA field, and they were separate. Can you see my cursor, by the way? I think you should be able to. Okay, all right. So you got your regular genetic genealogy field. That's folks like me that are helping my neighbors at the local family history center, right? We're using genetic genealogy for adoptees, misattributed parentage, missing lines in your family tree in the 1800s, something like that. SNP DNA tests are being offered at Family Tree DNA, 23andMe, Ancestry. MyHeritage came in 2016. These are DNA databases that are privately owned. Each of the companies owns their own DNA database that's mostly made up of their own tests. Ancestry, you can't be in that database unless you took their test. 23andMe can't be in that database unless you took their test. MyHeritage came to the scene very late, so they accepted uploads as a way to build their database. I remember when they announced MyHeritage, I was like, why would I want to buy that? Why would I want to take that test? There's nobody in there to be compared to. Well, they opened the floodgates and said, no, transfer it in. And then they sold tests super low. So I was like, dang it. Now I have to transfer all my tests there because there might be somebody that took a cheap test there. And now my best match is going to be over at MyHeritage. And that happened several times. Family Tree DNA is one of the older companies because they also offer, they're the only ones still in the game that offer Y-DNA and mitochondrial DNA testing services. They do their own autosomal DNA test called the Family Finder. That would be the head-to-head with Ancestry and 23andMe. But they don't really sell very many of those. They get a lot of uploads into the database. But those are all privately owned by the companies that sell the tests or accept the uploads. These kind of tests look at 500,000 to 700,000 SNPs, which are single nucleotide polymorphisms. So a whole lot of information, And long strings of that DNA, or segments is what we call it in the field. Long segments are used to determine shared DNA, and it's measured in centimorgans. So we're looking for really long pieces that that got handed down to you. It's the same chunk that would have been in your grandparents' DNA profile, and you will get a whole chunk of that. You'll get several chunks from each of your grandparents. And we use those chunks to determine relatedness. The statistics and tools that are used in genetic genealogy were created by the genealogy community. This has nothing to do with law enforcement or the field of forensics in 2017. And there's also no formal education path. Like I said about my own history, when I cracked open the results of those first DNA tests in 2014, I thought, oh, we're gonna learn all the answers, and then no, it is like, what do I do with this information? You know, and I had to go out and find blogs to learn to read about it because there was nothing formal in place where you could go to get training on this. So there were fortunately early people in the field who were prolific bloggers and sharing of information and compiling statistics and pushing that information back out to the community. So it was very much a community driven thing, all of the knowledge that is used in genetic genealogy. You'd think it would have come from the DNA testing companies, but not really. It's almost like they're like, here's your list of matches. Good luck, you know, like Ancestry put out that super detailed white paper. Nobody could get through it, you know. It took someone like Leah Larkin with a PhD in biology to kind of break down the information in there and say, okay, these are usable statistics, and then Johnny Pearl to make a nice interface for that, right? Of course, I'm talking about the shared centimorgan project, the filter tool where you can put in the amount of centimorgans. So that's the genetic genealogy field. Completely separate from that, you have law enforcement using forensic DNA for law enforcement investigations. They're using STR DNA profiles created by government crime labs. The databases that are used are owned by the government. You probably have heard about CODIS. So there are various levels of databases within that field. They're looking at about 20 STR markers or loci, and STR stands for short tandem repeats. You'll notice that is different from SNPs over here, single nucleotide polymorphisms, different type of DNA. Each of these 20 markers is highly informative, changes often, mutates often. Because of that, they can use so few markers and get to the kind of statistics where they're in court and they're saying only 1 in 1 billion people would have this exact profile. That's why they can do that, is because of how highly informative those few markers are. They're changing fast. We're using, for genetic genealogy, SNP markers in long strings because you match at so many places. They are not highly informative individually at all. We have to use the long segments to make it informational for us. In the forensic DNA field, statistics, tools, and formal education are all overseen and regulated and have been proven at court. Two totally separate fields until about 2017. And then you got a bunch of minds thinking, my mind did not go here. If it did, I don't remember ever thinking it. But there were people in the field that were saying, could we use genetic genealogy for law enforcement investigations? No guidelines existed for this because these are the forward thinkers, right? No guidelines existed for it. They would need to create new profiles using SNP DNA at private labs because no government labs were making SNP profiles or had the ability to do that. It's a different machine. It's a different type of test. It's different chemicals. It's different training for the lab technicians. You cannot just ask somebody in a government crime lab to go create a SNP profile for you. That ability did not exist and really still doesn't largely. I'll kind of talk about that at the end. They would need to compare in the genetic genealogy databases, which are owned by the private companies like I just talked about. And they're really, you know, most of the genetic genealogy databases had something about law enforcement usage written in there, but in terms of like if law enforcement comes to us and they want your home address or your credit card information or whatever off of your account, we won't give it to them. That was the type of concerns they were thinking about when they were talking about if law enforcement comes to us, we will protect your information. And then I think it was super interesting for me that both people in the law enforcement sphere and the genetic genealogy spheres were initiating these first usages, and we're kind of thinking about it separately. So that's 2017. 2018, we have our first FIGG announcements. DNA Doe Project had an unidentified human remains case that they solved and announced shortly before the first case that most people heard about, which was the Golden State Killer, which of course was crime scene DNA in California. These cases were announced very early, like April 2018, kind of close to each other. It came out near the same time. So again, uh, how did they do this, right? Because there's no guidelines set up for it. Uh, None of their labs could create the profiles. So many questions centered around this that instantly there was like just a huge buzz and tons of headlines. I remember, people will talk about, I remember where I was standing this day in history or whatever. I remember exactly where I was standing when I heard the Golden State Killer case announced, because I had been working on getting um, mitochondrial DNA banked from the last living person in one of my own personal family history lines that is the carrier of this mitochondrial DNA of my like 3 times great grandmother. I still do not know who her mom is, but one day when I return to it, hopefully there's enough DNA testers now that I'd be able to figure that out. I'm going to be able to confirm that using that mitochondrial DNA. And this person had been kind of, I don't know, DNA testing, blah, 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 blah. So he had just barely said yes that he would take this mitochondrial DNA test at Family Tree DNA, and then all over the news is the Golden State Killer. And I was so irritated, like, this is going to implode the field. No one's going to take DNA tests. No one's going to, it's like going to have such an impact. And I was thinking about the personal impact to me and my own casework first, like my family history casework first. But then instantly on the heels of that came a whole rash of questions that almost everyone had. Look at all these headlines. Genealogy data corrects Golden State Killer case, but is it ethical? The messy consequences of the Golden State Killer case. This is the National Library of Medicine, an article there. Forensic genealogy, bioethics in the Golden State Killer case. Tons of concern in the general public and within the genetic genealogy community. The Legal Genealogist is a blog run by Judy G. Russell. She says right here, there's a conversation our community had better have, or find that the price of sharing is the surrender of our own privacy and the rights of our family members, targeted less for what they've done than for what they are, that they're just related to us. The DNA Geek, this is Dr. Leah Larkin's blog, comparison of GEDmatch and the FBI's CODIS database. The rest of the Golden State Killer sparked debates about the ethics of government representatives using a private genetic genealogy database. Tons of these. There were a few people that were more excited about it. This was a Utah headline. There's our own CARE reporter. Utah's Cold Case Coalition wants you to share your DNA with cops to help solve murders. That was May 2018, you'll notice. And then the second paragraph in is like, but the ACLU is advising caution, please do not upload your DNA. All of the owners of these private genetic genealogy databases, Ancestry, 23andMe stuff, they were also quick to jump on headlines. It wasn't us, it wasn't us, it wasn't us. We didn't do this. Here's NBC News. Sacramento County prosecutors confirmed Thursday they found D'Angelo through genealogical websites. Ancestry and 23andMe issued statements denying that they had played any role. Here's a different article. Another company, MyHeritage, answered similarly. In response to your question, I can confirm that MyHeritage was not involved, has not heard of this before. Guess what? MyHeritage actually was involved in it. That came out afterwards. So no one was, the databases that were used were not consulted. They were just uploaded. It wasn't against the terms of service at MyHeritage at that time. It is against the terms of service now. Washington Post reports that they ran their evidence through GEDmatch. So here's the GEDmatch database statement. We were not approached by law enforcement or anyone else about this case or about the DNA. So you can see they did definitely find a way to use it, and it was very successful, but really just with no guidelines, nothing really in place. But they definitely had proof of concept now. They had definitely shown it worked, and the floodgates were totally open. The attention went instantly to the GEDmatch database since MyHeritage didn't even know that they were involved, but GEDmatch had been told and then admitted that they had been told. So that leads to the next question. What is GEDmatch? Okay, so you notice I didn't list GEDmatch over here at the DNA testing sites. That's because GEDmatch does not sell DNA tests. I need a little coughing break. Okay, GEDmatch does not sell DNA tests. GEDmatch is a company that was started in 2011, like before I even took my first DNA test, before Ancestry sold DNA tests. GEDmatch had started because there were a few companies that were selling DNA tests. If we were cousins working on the same family history problem, and or maybe a theory, and we wanted to know if we shared DNA, and I tested at 23andMe and you tested at Family Tree DNA, we did not have a way to compare our DNA to each other at that time. Um, and the DNA tests were expensive. Now you can find a good sale for like $50 at Mother's Day, Father's Day, and around the holidays. But they were several $100s each back then. So if you didn't have the ability to go pay one of you to get in the other person's database, you needed a way to compare. So um, the site GEDmatch was created so that you can upload a test you took almost anywhere else, and then you can compare it to each other. This was one of my favorite headlines after the Gold State Killer stuff. How an unlikely family history website transformed cold case investigations. This is Curtis Rogers standing outside of his home. He was retired. He's one of the two founders of GEDmatch. Um, he was just working away on his genealogy, doing a good thing, he thought, for the family history community by making these comparisons available. And then overnight, he is the center of attention because of how easy and helpful his database is to use for these types of FIGG cases. This is from that same, gosh, what did I say it was? New York Times. This is from that same New York Times article. Initially, Mr. Rogers was outraged at how law enforcement was using his website, but he now feels proud. Within a year, I think it will be accepted, he said. This article was October. Golden State Killer and the DNA Dope Project announced their first cases in April. This is October of 2018. It's kind of been a shock to all of us to see how these things develop, said Mr. Rogers, and his partner, Mr. Olson, agreed. I feel like I'm on a high-speed ride with no way to steer. They really, I don't think, had ever conceptualized what might have happened, and how they were just going to be in the middle of a whole bunch of ethical debates, and also a lot of anger from the genealogy community. A lot of people were very upset that this was allowed to happen. And first, the anger was at law enforcement that they had done this without consulting GEDmatch. But then GEDmatch said, well, we have said that you can use, this website could be used in a lot of different ways. Oh, I think I took it out. But part of this, he says in there, we've always had a warning on there that, you know, this could be used in a lot of different ways. So be aware. 2017 again. So this is before the Golden State Killer and the DNA Dope Project. But this is the state of the databases and how many DNA tests had been taken at that time. And this is from the DNA Geek website. Dr. Leah Larkin compiles these and updates them every year at least. So in 2017, the green is the Ancestry database. It kind of dominated from 2012. It just took off and instantly had more than almost anybody here. You can see 23andMe was ahead of them for a long time, but then slowed down, right? Because Ancestry paired it with genealogy tools, and you know, we all know how far that goes when you've got genealogy tools, and the ability to see the family tree of your DNA match is so helpful. So it's obvious why they outstripped 23andMe very quickly. But you can see this chart, that's the 4 million mark right there. The GEDmatch database is this tiny gray line down here. FTDNA is the red line. My heritage wasn't even on here because they just started in 2016. So you'd think that with all the outrage and ethical concerns that the DNA testing would have slowed down, kind of, right? But by 2019, so this is a year after those cases were announced, Ancestry's all the way up to 15 million DNA tests that they've sold. 23andMe also took off. This is August of 2018 right here. You can see how sharp that growth rate was in 2018 to 2019. GEDmatch remained pretty static there. Well, not static because they're up to about 1 million now, but right here at the bottom of the chart, and still is. If you look at this now, I didn't include an updated one, but Ancestry's database is up to like 25 million. And GEDmatch is still hovering at or under 2 million. So you can see It was more useful in the early days when tests were a lot more expensive and there were a lot less tools available at other places. So why did I kind of want to give you the history and timeline of how all that started? Well, because I want you to understand how much was unknown at the time, and then how much about this field has been um, things that are reactionary, changes that occurred because the ball was in motion, not because um, this field of FIG was started with the end in mind, but because we're playing catch up to create policies and procedures and guidelines and everything else to support something that is now happening. The floodgates are open. So now how can we ensure that it's done in a responsible, reasonable manner? Terms of service for all companies have been changed multiple times since. At the GEDmatch and Family Tree DNA databases, there are opt-in and opt-out options now, whereas before that would be unheard of because nobody had thought like, oh, you got to opt out just in case law enforcement uploads the Golden State Killer's DNA there, right? That wasn't a consideration. So that's a change that's come since. The FTDNA database decided to embrace FIG and allow uploads from law enforcement to their database, and their database has also been purchased since that time. The GEDmatch database also got purchased. They were purchased by Verigen, which is a private company that is in the forensic field, at least. They're not in the genealogy field, and they're not in well, they do laboratory equipment and laboratory kits and chemicals and stuff like that. So they're in a forensic field, but not exactly genealogy or stuff like that. They didn't start that way. We've seen the opening of private labs focusing on forensic SNP DNA, such as Intermountain Forensics. Utah Cold Case Coalition, Kara Porter, she was one of the early people that was like, there need to be more labs to support this work. So you might say, where did they get the DNA testing done? And there's a couple different types of DNA tests that are used, like when you take a test through Ancestry or 23andMe or something like that, that's a microarray test that does very well with good, high quality DNA samples because they're getting, a spit or a cheek swab, very good, very recently provided, healthy DNA. That's really not the same as you get from a lot of crime scene samples. The medical field in 2017 was already using whole genome sequencing to kind of make advances in medicine, and geneticists, of course, were using it. So there were people that were doing whole genome sequencing with SNPs, in addition to the genealogy companies using microarray testing for SNPs. Okay, I'm seeing some chat. I'm going to hurry and look at it really quick. If law enforcement uses STR and GEDmatch is uploading SNPs, is law enforcement retesting DNA using SNPs, or can STRs be uploaded to GEDmatch? I think probably got answered down here, but let me go back a few slides.
Yeah,
Totally.
I didn't interrupt you because I have a feeling you will probably cover the FBI rules and when we can and can't use when law enforcement can and can't use um the STRs and when they have to go and get SNP tests and yeah.
If you want to compare in the genetic genealogy databases, which is FIG, right? FIG stands for Forensic Investigative Genetic Genealogy, right here. If you want to do genetic genealogy, you have to get a SNP test. You cannot put STRs in this database. It would be totally unhelpful because you don't have anything to compare it to. You've got to have something to compare to these 500,000 to 700,000 SNPs. So STRs are compared to STRs. SNPs are compared to SNPs, totally separate databases, totally separate lab equipment that creates the profiles, totally separate databases, totally separate. So yes, they had to go out and they had to have sample left over. If they didn't have enough sample, there are cases that law enforcement would love to use FIG on, but over the years, they've used up every single bit of DNA evidence that they had doing the various STR tests that have been available to them. And so they cannot proceed to FIG because they do not have more sample to go create that SNP file. So again, they do not upload STRs to GEDmatch. It is not possible. They have to go pay for a brand new file to be created that looks at the single nucleotide polymorphisms to come out of that DNA. So completely separate STR testing, database, equipment, results, statistics, completely different than SNP testing, database, statistics, results. Completely different. If you have enough sample, you can get both types of tests done. Okay, I'm going to go back forward. Okay, so yeah, all these changes that have been coming have happened after that first case, reactionary to that first case, right? There are a lot of genetic genealogists now in the field working on FIGG cases. There's probably 100 or so that work for private FIGG organizations such as the DNA Doe Project or Parabon or Intermountain Forensics, Identifinders International, Moxie Forensics, Ignite Forensics. There's a whole bunch of organizations doing this now. All those added up are still probably less than 100 genetic genealogists working on them. The FBI has a team of about 200, I think I heard at one of the conferences last year, or more than 200. Those are in-house folks that they've kind of trained themselves for the most part. And then in terms of working in-house at law enforcement, there are some, not as many as you might think, because it takes an awful lot of money and resources for a law enforcement agency such as your local sheriff's office to say, we're going to dedicate people to make a team that can work on this. And for one thing, who would they get? Are they going to repurpose their in-house forensic DNA analysts that have been working on STR profiles? They don't know how to do genetic genealogy. They've never worked on a SNP profile. They don't know the statistics that are involved or the tools that are involved or what they should expect to find when they look at a SNP profile. They're not taught how to do traditional genealogy when you are an STR DNA analyst. It's a completely different field that they were not educated in. So for a law enforcement organization to say, we want to open up our own unit, and a lot of them are doing this now and want to be able to handle it in-house. They can see this is the future technology. Why should they outsource it? They should be doing it in-house. They should learn to do it in-house. It's a very time-consuming endeavor. It takes years to have enough experience, years of working on SNP profiles to have enough experience to be able to confidently run a unit by yourself. There's just so much to know. And every single thing is, every single case is different. You know, you run that sample through and you don't know what you're going to get. Are you going to come back with a very simple, like let's say if my dad ended up as an unidentified body somewhere, his total time for, you know, to work the FIGG case would be like 10 minutes because of all the people that I DNA tested in our family and put their DNA out on the GEDmatch and the FTDNA website. Do you know what I mean? It would be instantaneous, fast, done. They would have an identification. But then sometimes you upload a profile and you can look at the matches and go, oh no, these are all like fifth or sixth cousins, and most of the people that are the DNA relatives are currently living in other countries. They are living currently in Poland and Russia, and they're fifth or sixth cousins. Am I going to be able to go back and you know, do enough research to connect somebody in this country to fifth or sixth cousins that are still living in Poland and Russia? Other times you might have a case and it's, oh my goodness, look at all those surnames. I already know for a fact this is going to be a Puerto Rican endogamy case, and that has special considerations of its own as well. So you don't know what you're going to get. So for law enforcement to be able to say, we're just going to do this in-house and we're just going to start up on our own, this is a years-long endeavor, and they usually end up hiring people from the genealogy field to help at least at first. And this is how far the field has come since the inception of that. Okay, I see one more question about STR and SNP testing. Let me explain it to you this way. Think of it almost as like if you had a physical description of a person, and one physical description is, you're looking for a person with wearing a red shirt and that has blonde hair. And the other physical description is you're looking for somebody with blue eyes and tan colored running shoes. You just cannot compare those two things to each other because they are not, their information is not the same. It's totally different information. It cannot be compared. It's all part of your DNA, but our DNA is very complicated. We have autosomal DNA, we have X DNA, we have mitochondrial DNA, we have those short tandem repeats. Short tandem repeats are almost like stutters on specific markers, where you look at one marker and you say, oh, wow, or one place, and you're like, there was a stutter there and that got repeated there 6 times. That's why it's called a short tandem repeat. And they're measuring the number of times the stutter appears. With SNP testing, we don't care about any stutter. We're looking at just one individual spot on each of those. We're not counting any stutters. So you can't say, okay, I'm going to compare the first number, the first letter of all these things to the stutter locations, because we didn't look at that. So it's all your DNA, but just different way of looking at your DNA. So it just cannot be compared. Don't let your brain run too hard on that, because all you need to know is it's oranges and apples, and you just can't compare it. The best DNA analyst in the world can have both profiles in front of them. One's an STR profile, one's a SNP profile, and there's nothing they can do to say it's the same person or not. Not right now. If you want to see a complete timeline of the history of FIGG, on the blog, The DNA Geek, that's Dr. Leah Larkin. She gives a like blow by blow. There's probably like 20 entries for 2018, 2019 of like all the changes of the terms of service and some of the really important things. The database is being purchased, stuff like that. So if you want to take a deep dive into that, it looks like this. This is her blog, The DNA Geek. You're looking for November 2019 timeline of forensic genetic genealogy, and then she updates that every time something else happens. Okay, so where are we now? Forensic DNA, the STR testing is still used. It's used every day still, just the way it always has been. Law enforcement will get that's the first thing that they do. So let's use crime scene DNA, for example. So there's a crime scene and they're able to get a good STR profile. They upload that into the CODIS database and say, do we have a match? Now, remember, the beauty of STR testing is it's looking at those stutters, those short tandem repeats. They're highly informative because they change so much. So you can have a full sibling in the CODIS database. Well, first of all, if you're using it for crime scene DNA, there are only a few states that would even let you say, oh, there's a parent or full sibling that's in the CODIS DNA database. That's called a familial match in CODIS. There's only like 13 states that will allow that. So mostly in the CODIS data space, you're looking for an exact hit, an exact match to that same exact profile. So that works very well in the case of serial killers, serial rapists, repeat offenders of any kind. If they've committed a crime that qualified them to have their DNA in the CODIS database already, then when they commit a new crime and the STR profile is in there, then it will hit, and then the two different agencies can say, oh my goodness, our homicide case, our suspect matches your DNA profile in your homicide case, even though we're in a different state even. And then they can kind of combine their investigation to see if they can use information from both to get them closer to their end goal. So that still happens. But I should look up the exact number. Somebody here might know, or it might be easy to Google, but there are so many thousands of profiles in the CODIS database that don't have an exact hit to a person. Because if you're charged with a crime And so your DNA can go in there and you're charged with a crime and they collected your DNA. Then they know who you are. Now your name's connected to that STR profile in the CODIS database. But if it's the example I just gave before, where it's, two homicide cases in different states and neither one of them knows the name of their suspect, they still don't know who they're looking for. And they're hoping that at a certain point in time, this person's going to commit another crime for which they are charged and their DNA will be collected and attached to their name. And out of the blue, they will get an email that says, hey, you have a match to your CODIS profile. It's this guy in a third state that was charged for this crime. And then they'll be able to get some traction on their case. But in the meantime, you've got tons of cases that have STR profiles sitting out there that do not have any type of hit going on with them. So they're cold cases now, right? Law enforcement is still investigating and doing what they can, but at a certain point, they go cold. You also have cases where there is no DNA available, so the case never goes into the CODIS profile, or there's a mixed profile available, or like if a body is burned very badly, you might not be able to get an STR profile out of a set of burned bones, but you might be able to get a SNP profile. So there are tons and tons of different cases out there. And again, the first go-to is always going to be this forensic DNA with STRs. Okay. The FIGG investigations, that is an add-on. That is a starting over with a new technology, a new test, a new set of databases, a new everything. So they'll do the forensic DNA with STRs, and then they'll come over if they have enough sample and it's a qualifying crime or an unidentified remains, then they can do investigative genetic genealogy, which is the SNP testing. So you can only use that for unidentified human remains and violent crimes, like I said. You can see more about this at GEDmatch and at FTDNA. They each have their set of things that qualify, but essentially it is going to be violent sexual assaults or homicides, some of the really horrific things like that. The SNP DNA profiles are still created mainly at private labs like Intermountain Forensics. The first public, which is a government lab, is now opening up in Texas at the University of North Texas at UNT. So they have just opened up, but they'll be focusing mostly on Texas cases, especially to start. It's being funded by the Texas legislature. The DNA databases are still privately owned. So whereas with STR DNA, you're comparing it in a government-owned database, that's not happening in genetic genealogy. We still have to worry about what if the databases are sold to somebody else. The GEDmatch and Family Tree databases charge law enforcement $700 each time a case is uploaded. And what's really to stop them from saying it's $5,000 each time a case is uploaded? What's to stop them from saying, we're not going to let you upload cases to our database anymore at all? And then FIGG has just stopped dead in its tracks, right? So that is a concern and a consideration. Some formal education paths exist now, but there's still no substitute for experience, to be honest. The statistics and tools are still the ones that were created by the genealogy community, and court cases and state laws are just now beginning to come into play to kind of make regulations and guidelines. The Department of Justice does have some guidelines that are in place on this. We're getting close on time, so I'm not going to go over those. But just know we are still, even though it's been since 2018, and that seems like a long time, that's 6 years, we're still in the infancy of this field because the guidelines, the legislation will come as a result of court cases and challenges to the way it's going now. So how does genetic genealogy work in general? Well, like I said, it's just like regular genetic genealogy, except regular genetic genealogy is easier because you've got these great big DNA matches and you can freely contact all your DNA relatives and be, hey, cousin, we share some DNA, and, get some momentum going with your cousins. Forensic investigative genetic genealogy, we have only those 2 databases and little to no contact with DNA relatives. You can see why it would It's would not be a good thing to alert a potential suspect that a case is being investigated. So we have those two. DNA Justice is a brand new um, upload comparison site that's been started by a group of long-term forensic investigative genetic genealogists. It's a private nonprofit group that is determined to make a database that cannot be sold or used for other purposes. So please consider uploading to there. So this is kind of the path through for a FIGG case. We start with the SNP profile for a qualified case. It can go into any of these databases or all three. Again, $700 for GEDmatch, $700 for FTDNA, free for DNA Justice, but super tiny database because it's brand new. So the chances of having any helpful matches are low until more people upload. Once that profile is in there, we use the living DNA relatives to tree build and create genetic family networks. I'm going to go over this in more detail on the next slide, so I'm not going to talk about that. And then we work on theories for where a candidate could be placed within those trees. So if you want to work in this field, you have to have worked with a lot of SNP profiles, a lot of regular genetic genealogy profiles. You need to have some experience in these databases over here specifically. It's super easy nowadays to just do genetic genealogy and Ancestry and 23andMe because they're so big and they've got so much. But you need to have experience in these other databases and the tools that they have there. I'm going to skip that slide out of interest of time. Okay, here we go. Tree building and creating family networks. So that looks like this. You've got to be able to take the list of DNA relatives that are going to be provided by the genetic genealogy database. You got to be able to take those DNA relatives and identify them. Who is this person? What if the kit says that, the name of the kit is Jan Smith? Do you know what I mean? There's a lot of Jan Smiths in the world. Which Jan Smith am I looking at here? So you have to be able to identify and connect DNA relatives to common ancestors, and you'll get several of these couples, couple A, couple B, couple C, D, E, F, G, that you can say, okay, I've got this nice little family network, and then you need to check for DNA support of those family groups. This guy's supposed to be a third cousin once removed to these two testers down here. They're first cousins to each other. Do they all share the right amount of DNA with each other, that I have built this family network correctly? Do the descendants of this couple B share DNA with the descendants of couple A? I hope not, because I want those groups to be totally separate and to represent different ancestor groups that I've correctly identified. In terms of seeing do they share the right amount of DNA with each other, we use all the regular genetic genealogy tools like the Shared Centimorgan Project. This portion here is user submitted data. The top portion right here, this is probabilities that are computer modeled data. So two very good data sets at this Shared Centimorgan Project website. If you want to work in this field to be able to do that part of the work, these are the things that effective FIGG practitioners have. They have good research skills and strategies for people living from 1950 to the present day. These are living people, less genealogical records that you're going to find at places like Ancestry or Family Search. And you're going to be looking more at places like social media, internet searches, obituaries, newspapers, etc. If you want to know how much public information is out there, try researching yourself, or trade with a genealogy friend and say, hey, I'll research you, you research me. See how much you can learn from each other from just one email address or just one name and a location. It's shocking how much information we make public about ourselves. Good traditional genealogy skills. This is 1950 and then back to the 1850s. That's the main time period that's helpful in most FIGG cases, but frequently we'll also be looking in the early 1800s as well. You want to have good skills in multiple genealogy sites and repositories. So if you have taken your own Ancestry DNA test and you work just exclusively within Ancestry and Ancestry's records, that's not going to be enough that you could say, I think I could do this work in this field. You're going to need to get more experience and go deeper and broader to other genealogical tools and websites. There's lots of public information available on this, lots of education and training. Specifically for traditional genealogy, the Family Search wikis are very good. Family Search has a wiki. If you Google Family Search wiki, Texas, Family Search wiki, Upshur County, Texas, Family Search wiki, Jewish genealogy, anything you can think of, there's going to be a Family Search wiki on that that will kind of walk you through the record collections that are available for that area or that time frame or that population, stuff like that. You also need good genetic genealogy skills. So understanding DNA statistics and probabilities. If this is all over your head and you're like, well, I just joined to get a quick overview, don't listen to this part, okay? Just totally check out. If you're a few of the people that are like, I want to know if I can do this. Do I already know enough to do this? This part's for you, okay? Everybody else just gloss over for a minute. You're fine. And you don't need to know this. It's only relevant if you want to do this work or you're trying to kind of test yourself to see if you think you're at that point, okay? So good genetic genealogy skills, not enough that just to understand the statistics and or just to use those statistics and probability tools, really understand them. Where is the data coming from? What are the algorithms behind it? What are the things that can affect it? Stuff like that. Chromosome mapping, this is so important. It can reduce time and frustration. DNA Painter is the best thing for that. That's still what we recommend everybody uses. Learn about xDNA, y-DNA, and mitochondrial DNA haplogroups if you haven't had to do that already because you've been working on family history, genetic genealogy in places like Ancestry. There's a question in here about the best websites to find people from 1950 to present, paid subscriptions and costs. That's this section right here. A subscription to Bin Verified or Truthfinder or Spokeo, something like that is very helpful. A free product you can use is Family Tree Now. And that out of the free services for that, I like that one probably the best and use that one probably the most. A simple Google search is far and away sometimes the best thing you can do because it'll show you snippets from all the paid websites. And sometimes you can link all those snippets together to get the whole picture without ever paying for the subscription. So Google search is going to be your best friend. But yeah, a lot of the really good ones are going to require a subscription and they're not cheap. It's like $30 a month for Bin Verified and Truthfinder, Spokeo, those types of places. Actually, if you have a subscription to Ancestry, go to the public volume records 1 and 2. And those have a lot of the same address database information. Ancestry requires a paid subscription as well. Family Search is free. You have to make an account, but it's free, and it does have some of that same information as well. It's just not as easy to use as Ancestry. And yes, those subscriptions are worth the cost if you're going to work in this field or work for adoptees. Those subscriptions are worth the cost. Okay, that was this section. That's the things you need to do just to get to the point where you're creating this kind of family tree, this family grouping right here. Once you've got these family groups, and you're like, I've got this group of DNA relatives, I've got this group of DNA relatives, now you can start to work, skipping back forward, to see where does your unknown person fit in. You can use those statistics and the probabilities and your chromosome map to come up with some pretty good theories to say, I think the candidate is going to be a grandchild of couple A through a different child than the ones that have these DNA testers here. On couple B, I think it's going to be a great grandchild. And more specifically, I think on couple B, it's going to be a great grandchild. And it's going to be the mom. The line going to couple B is going to be from the mother of my candidate. That's how specific you can get if you understand chromosome mapping, xDNA, your haplogroups, and the probabilities and statistics. This is that same slide, but just emphasis on kind of some of the points in yellow. And with this added, the chromosome mapping, you can split the family network sometimes into the two parent lines. Or you can say this is going to be the mom's relative lines or ancestors, and this is going to be the dads. And again, I just showed couple A and B, but you're going to be looking at 4 to 10 family groups. And you need to have very thorough descendancy research skills, because if you know you're looking for something that's going to come together like this, that you're going to have a descendant of couple A is going to have a relationship with a descendant of couple B, and then a descendant of that union couple that kind of brings together these diverse DNA communities into one profile here. If you miss this child, and I don't know why, I've gone and looked at the historical statistics. It's really like history says couples in the 1800s, late 1800s and early 1900s only had um, like 2 to 4 kids on average or something like that. I'm telling you, every single time I look at this, we're like 10 kids. Yeah, I see some of you shaking your heads. It's always 10 kids. I don't know why. It's so irritating, because then there's so many descendants. It takes so much time. But if you miss the one kid that your candidate is on that line, then you have done so much work on the, 5 other siblings in there that are unrepresented in this cluster, and you're not going to find your candidate. So you have to have very good, very thorough genealogy skills to make sure you have picked up every child of these couples so that you don't miss your candidate. It's so easy, and so many people overlook that. Even people who have gone through very good training programs overlook that a lot of times. Okay, so now we come to investigative lead. That's our team. What do we do with that? We go to law enforcement. It's right back to forensic DNA, to STRs. STRs have been proven in court and used in court and used in charging documents for a long time now, and are proven and understood statistics. And a law enforcement organization should not be taking my word for it that I think I found your person. We can give them the name, which is why it's called a lead, right? This is an investigative lead. They will go research. Sometimes they can rule out that person and say, oh, this is an unidentified remains case. The person that you suggested is actually alive. We found them living alive and well over in, just kind of off the grid somewhere. And that's why you thought they had disappeared, but they're still alive and fine. So sometimes they'll rule a candidate out, and we'll go back to the drawing board and, oh my goodness, there's a sibling we missed, or there's a sibling that nobody could have found because a child was adopted out of the family and there's no record of that. It wasn't talked about. That happens a lot of times because there are surprises in families. So law enforcement has to conduct their own investigation and do everything they can to say, yeah, we agree it's this person. And then after that, they do their own confirmation testing using that STR data. So it kind of comes full circle back to law enforcement there. The FIGG investigation is like this little side part that pops out, and then it's right back to the forensic STR testing. So now, if you still, after all that, want to work or volunteer in this field, effective FIGG practitioners working as a part of a team might have other specialties that can make up for some missing experience. Because I know it sounds like a lot to say you need to know how to chromosome map and understand the probabilities and a great traditional genealogy researcher and all these things, right? That's the kind of the total, well, that's a total package from a genetic genealogy standpoint, but there are still things missing that would be more ideal that you can make up for over here. So if you're a person that has genetic genealogy skills in endogamous populations and pedigree collapse, I don't care if you have ever looked at GEDmatch or not. I would very happily take you to my team because you have a specific skill set that will be helpful in the context of a team where other people on the team can do the chromosome mapping or different parts of the research that you're not familiar with. I want your skill for that specific endogamous population. Or if you have experience researching in a specific country or population, countries that are always in demand and populations are going to be Hispanic research, Eastern European research, Jewish research, also any endogamous population, populations with naming conventions or cultural considerations. if we know that the DNA profile is someone that has Indigenous American DNA, I would prefer, everybody would prefer if we had a researcher on our team that also had Indigenous American DNA. There are cultural considerations and things that we would want to factor in. You might know about that specific community, maybe not, since there are a lot of different communities in that specific group. Um, but also just because of the sensitivity of DNA within the Indigenous American populations. We would want to go about that with the utmost respect and be made aware of things that maybe we hadn't considered because I don't have an Indigenous American DNA specialist on my team. So if you see yourself in some of these specialties, just know there might be a place for you right now. And then you can learn the rest as you go. You'd be mentored in the rest. If you have exceptional living people research skills, social media, social media is a great big one. Somebody the other day was telling me about something that was solved using Snapchat. And I was like, wow, I haven't even attempted to use Snapchat in any of our investigations yet. I haven't looked at the Snapchat terms of service or like, I'd have to go review that before I felt comfortable adding that into my little list of, places that I go looking for information. But there are so many places where we put information about ourselves out there. If you are exceptionally good at researching living people, there's probably a place for you right now on a team. If you're good at chromosome mapping, the probabilities, the GEDmatch tools. GEDmatch has been around since 2011. Their tools are kind of a hodgepodge still. Different tools have different thresholds. If you understand the deep inner workings of GEDmatch and all the tools on GEDmatch, there's probably a place for you right now. And then anything you have that's related to forensics, law enforcement, courtroom, genetics, sciences of any kind, there's a place for you right now, and people will be willing to teach you the rest. Because one of the bad parts about this disconnect is you have all these genetic genealogists working on law enforcement cases, but without any training in law enforcement or forensics or things that would be respected at court. Does that make sense? If it goes to trial, somebody with a genetics background, even though we know in the genealogy community, you still don't know how to do genetic genealogy, even if you're a geneticist. Have you ever logged on and used a SNP profile? Geneticists are working on a totally different thing, but that would be so well respected at court. It would be a benefit to a case to have a geneticist as part of the team. So if you see any of these specialties in your experience level, there's probably a place for you. Future of the field, I'm sorry, I know we're already over time. We haven't gotten even to questions, but future of the field, lots of opportunities still to come. We're 6 years in, but this is early days. Really, it is early days still. Law enforcement agencies are taking FIGG in-house, but they need to hire from the genealogy community, like I said before. There's going to be a transition from mostly volunteer work to more paid opportunities. I saw more job openings in 2023 than the previous years combined. So it just shows you that it's just starting. There are formal education paths within the forensic sphere that will come, I think. Right now, the education paths are still kind of in the genealogy world, but that will come. Just like, it's a whole career choice to be a forensic DNA analyst and work on STR profiles. It will become a career choice to work on SNP profiles and to have genetic genealogy training. And as legislation comes, we're already seeing efforts to start more licensing, not more, just anything that gives licensing or accreditation to FIGG practitioners. So IGAB is one of those that's coming out that you might hear about and see. So entry into the field, you're like, yes, that's me. I've got all these things. I checked all these boxes. How do you enter into the field? The current best path of entry is going to revolve around a specific skill, experience, qualifier. One of those things that are in need is going to be your best path in, or a recommendation by someone currently in the field. And so you might say, well, how do I get to know somebody in the field? Well, get to know the broader genetic genealogy community. let them see what you're capable of and what you're working on. Volunteer with a search angel group. Respond to your cousin messages. I cannot tell you how many people get pulled into work on FIG cases because somebody that's a current FIG practitioner says, oh yeah, I've got a cousin that's been doing this for years as well, and she and I used to go back and forth, or he and I used to go back and forth over this, and he's so good at doing this or that or whatever. And because they're a known trusted entity, they get brought in. They have a recommendation. So respond to your cousin messages, work with your cousin groups, put your DNA at GEDmatch, FTDNA, and DNA Justice. Make sure, do something there that kind of alerts them that you're a FIG advocate, or put something on your Facebook profile, or however you think people are going to find you, because they're going to go research you using your email address or your name at GEDmatch and FTDNA. Do something that alerts them that you're an experienced person in the field. We are far more likely, in the rare instances when we reach out, we're more likely to reach out to other genetic genealogists, because they're not going to be like, what do you mean you're using my case for a law enforcement purpose of blah, 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 blah. Some people, even with the opt-in, opt-outs and emails sent about the terms of service change, still do not realize that their DNA is being compared to crime scene DNA or unidentified human remains. And it's a shocking, hard conversation sometimes that results in them pulling their DNA out of the database, which is excellent. If they weren't aware of it and they don't want it compared, they should pull it out of the database. But it's a much easier decision for law enforcement, for me to recommend to law enforcement, let's reach out to this one person. If I can see, this person's a genetic genealogist, they already know what the opt-in, opt-outs mean. If we tell them who their best shared match is, they already are going to know what part of the tree it falls on and how far back, and they're going to recommend other people the DNA test. So you might get called. Several people have been brought into this field because they were contacted because they were like a third or fourth cousin to some other investigation. And then be aware, send out your email inquiries, get on people's list to volunteer. But there are so many emails that come that it is very hard for organizations to respond to everyone. Very hard. I probably have at least 100 emails of people that say, I'd love to volunteer for your organization. How can I help you? If some of those names I recognize here, I've sent back to some, but not everybody. As time allows, I send back things saying, do you have any of these specialties? So just know, if you lead with the specialties I've already mentioned, you're likely or more likely to get the response first, if that makes sense. And I've already tagged it somewhere, and everybody that's like me that has volunteers has tagged it somewhere. If you've said you have a specialty in it, so that, oh, I just got a French Acadian case uploaded. I haven't had time to reach out to this person that contacted us yet, but I'm going to now because I know from their email message that they had research experience in that area. So even if you don't get a response, just know your name's on a list at almost all the organizations. Include your specialties so that you're more likely to get a call back. If you want to look at some of the FIG resources that the Cold Case Coalition has made, you can go to coldcasehelp.com. It's under FIG resources. This is a good comparison of the databases. This is for people who really, are concerned that law enforcement has been looking at DNA. This kind of walks through. This is what law enforcement can see and use at those databases. It's a little bit outdated because it has the old upload prices on it. And this is a 2-page front and back. That's a flow chart that we give to law enforcement agencies to say, this is how you would start your case. This is the walkthrough. The whole front side of it is, this is the lab. This is how you're going to get your SNP DNA profile created. This is how much it might cost. The back side is, this is what the genealogy team is working on. They're going to return information to you, but you still have to confirm that with STR testing. Formal FIG instruction. I'm just going to keep going. I know we're over, but I can see some of the questions in here are related to this. So you can take a little screenshot of that if it's helpful to you. Formal FIG education pass, University of New Haven. This is intensive. It's a very intensive course. It is respected in the forensic world. They work on mock cases. It's all online. It's a long course. You will come out of it with a ton of information. You will not be qualified to just go start working cases on your own if you don't already have deeper genetic genealogy background or traditional genetic genealogy background. We just had a case that we returned a lead on in March that it was everybody working on the team were new University of New Haven graduates, and they did a great job, but missed in the descendancy research a second marriage. The second marriage is the one that brought together the groups. Another mistake that another person made was two first cousins had the same name and lived in the same tiny community, and they mixed them up. And so then what happens is when you're doing descendancy research, you got all the wrong spouses marrying in now because you're on cousin Joe instead of cousin Joe. This cousin Joe married a different woman than this cousin Joe and had different kids who married different people. So you're going to miss the DNA lines joining together if you don't have the good traditional genealogy skills. University of New Haven does a big, huge section on traditional genealogy skills. It's just that, like I said, there's no trade for experience, really. You got to make those mistakes so that you're like, well, next time I won't chalk it up to like, oh, I've got a marriage for them. It's all good. Gonna keep looking. Ramapo College in New Jersey they work on real cases. They teach chromosome mapping specifically. They have a very experienced instructor that loves chromosome mapping. So you will get real case experience and come out with chromosome mapping skills, I believe. You can take an online course there or an in-person boot camp. United Data Connect. This again is an experienced FIGG instructor. She is very spreadsheet intensive. I also use spreadsheets. People think my spreadsheets are overwhelming. Her spreadsheets are 100 times more overwhelming than what I use, but she is very experienced, and her spreadsheet, like my spreadsheet, is a methodology in and of itself. So you will come out with good experience. That's a week-long course in person in Denver or in Florida. That's formal FIGG education path. None of these, you couldn't just pluck anybody off the street, plop them into any of these courses, and they're just set to go and be hired by law enforcement in-house because they completed it. That is not how it works. You still need experience. You can get FIGG instruction all over the place without going to one of those formal courses. I have not attended one of the formal courses. I mean, they kind of came in late for me, but it's just to point out that plenty of people do it without the formal courses. There's lots of genetic genealogy education paths. There's lots of online virtual training programs. I can see some people have already started putting some of those in the chat. Yes, RIP, SLIG, IGHR. You can see I'd started making that list, but never finished there. So that's good. The conferences, the special interest groups. Thank you, Erin Sears, for posting that. I see a lot of people like me are completely self-taught through blogs, books, and groups. One of the best books you can get to test your own knowledge on the subject is the book Advanced Genetic Genealogy Techniques and Case Studies. Sorry, I need a quick cough. I ordered that book when it came out. I don't even remember what year. Maybe it was 2018, 2019. I can't remember. Just because I was so excited to tear through it and see, what do I not know yet? This is the way this is my checker for myself. What do I know and what do I still need to learn? So you can use that book the same exact way that I did as well. Lots of blogs. Go to the long-term experienced bloggers. Go to the originals. Leah Larkin, the DNA Geek. She's going to be your probabilities person. DNA Explained, Roberta Estes. She does a lot of information on different populations and groups. The genetic genealogist, Blaine Bettinger. Ethical Considerations, Leah does that as well. All of them do ethical considerations at this point now. Blaine Bettinger is the person that gathered all the information for the Shared Son of Morgan project. Tons of good information there. Judy G. Russell, the legal genealogist. Sorry, another coughing break.
While Allison is busy coughing, I will let everybody know we will have her back. So I basically told her she was coming back before she even had her presentation today. So we will be having her back to kind of continue on. And hopefully she'll get some water and she's gonna recover in a moment or two. But she has so much to relay and she will be coming back for sure. I just don't have that scheduled yet.
Yes, I will be coming back. You can tell I love to talk about this nonstop. That last one was enough coffee, it made my eyes water. So I do go off camera for that. Facebook groups, not going to read those because those make me cough, but all those Facebook groups are very good. There's tons of Facebook groups. Again, go to groups that are led by experienced admin people and that don't have a million posts. DNA Detectives is a Facebook group run by CC Moore's group. Very good information there, but so many people in that group and new people that try to answer questions that you'll end up having to read a string of like 75 responses, and some of them will be correcting the other people in the group. So go to the more experienced, even if they're less popular groups. Now we're at the end. Okay. So any other questions from the chat that we didn't really cover?
I think we got most of them because we also had some other folks who were helping to answer some of those questions as well. Um, but yes. Also, I'm going to post in the chat the link from the Intermountain Forensics website just on understanding genetic genealogy because they have a lot of resources up there as well, just to kind of understand some of the stuff that Allison had like 2-3 seconds to touch on. But that's been a really good resources that we have sent out to folks, particularly trying to get them to donate DNA for our Tulsa project. But we wanted to make sure that all of those resources, Allison and her team did a great job making sure that those resources were really accessible. Because I've been working with Allison for a few years now, and most of the time I follow along very well with what she's talking about, and then there's a threshold where she just continues, and I'm like, nope, I'm not following anymore. So
That's why I tried to say in there at one point, it's perfectly acceptable to tap out if you're like, nope, I got what I needed from this. I just wanted the high level overview. But I knew from the names that there are some people that are looking for some specific information and a deeper dive.
we did
Um,
have
Somebody asked, what does it mean to volunteer with a search angel group? Erin Sears, will you answer that like off? Or Bob or anyone.
Oh, the search angel groups are groups that are helping adoptees. So you're looking for places like Search Angel, I think it's searchangel.com, or lots of different Facebook groups that you can volunteer at.
I'm so sorry. I think my voice has almost hit the limit. It just,
you made it to the
my
end.
talk, it tries to kick off more coughing. But yes, there are a lot of search angel groups that help adoptees. What I recommend to a lot of people, if you have already been dipping your toes in the water, you've worked on your own DNA test, you're feeling pretty good about that. Make a social media post on your own social media to your own friends and family and say, hey, I've been working on my own DNA test, learning a lot of stuff. I'm making a free offer to help anybody else. People that you did not know were adopted, that are your neighbors and your friends or the parents of your kids' friends, you're going to get private messages and people are going to go, hey, my brother was adopted and we've always wondered and blah, blah, blah. Would you help him? So that's a good way to volunteer to help. The family history centers that are run by the LDS Church, those are all over the whole country. That's where I started volunteering. If you know anything about DNA, they will embrace you to come in and help people, and you can pick up a regular shift there and you will get plenty of experience working on the DNA tests of people that come into the Family History Center.
Okay. I think we got most of the questions for now, but I think everyone's also happy that you'll come back, and hopefully you won't be sick when you come back.
I have to say, I'm just glad I got sick after the vacation instead of on the vacation.
Very true.
Like it was literally in the airport waiting to board for the flight home. And I was like, that was cutting it so close, but at least I made it through. So that was good. I think I said at the beginning of this, I recognize several of your names that I know I owe email responses to, that you've reached out to me for certain things. So please know I am trying to get that all done by the end of this week. So expect an email from me for several of you. You'll know who you are because I already sent you an email like a month ago being like, oh, okay, I'm gonna do this next week. And then you didn't hear anything back because I went on vacation.
Well, I would like to thank you, Allison, very much for presenting tonight, and I'm glad you're coming back, even though I kind of strong-armed you into it anyway. Um, but no, I thank you for taking the time today to kind of give us this very brief introduction to a very small tip of a very large iceberg. So our next training will be next month. I forgot to look up the day, but it's on there. I'm actually going to be conducting that training because I have a victim advocacy background. And we're going to talk a little bit about how do we navigate our own emotions when we're actually researching cold cases, because it's very easy to let that take over all the work and it's not good for your health. And ultimately, it's actually not good for your case either. So we'll talk about a little bit about what that looks like and give you some coping tips to kind of navigate through that. Um, so we'll be doing that. There will be a video of this. This is being recorded. I will try to get it up faster than I did with like February. So we still haven't rescheduled. March is one that got canceled rather unexpectedly. I wasn't expecting it. So but I'll make sure to get everybody's kind of information or get everybody information about when this video is available. And if you have questions, please feel free to reach out to me because you've all been emailed to me or by me at least once or twice. So it's Deborah@coldcasehelp.com. So other than that, thank you all for being here and for taking the time today. So have a good evening.
I do have actually one last thing to say. I should say thank you to each and every one of you for volunteering to help the Cold Case Coalition. Um, that is already your first step in the right direction if you want to be part of this field. That is how I started. And from working on cold cases and putting together timelines and doing reviews for Care Reporter. And then she knew that I was also a genetic genealogist. But I built a level of trust with her, and she was able to see my work and see how detail oriented I was, that I was ethical, my just regular genealogy research skills in looking at some of the information on the cold cases. And that was my foot in. So you've already taken your first step by being involved in this group. So well done, each of you, and thank you.
Case posts up. We're going to form a couple more teams, and so those will be coming up. Have that moment of like, they will be up for sure by this weekend. I may be able to get one or two up tonight. We'll see how I keep going through the evening, but we will have a couple of those posted up within the next few days. So we're slowly getting more cases up and running, and I just want to. One of the reasons why there's time on that is because I want to make sure that sometimes you get a case file and you feel like you're drowning, and I don't want you to feel like you're drowning. So we kind of try to start you off and then we let you loose together in a team. So yeah, part of that's my own capacity of making sure I'm at meetings with you folks and being able to give you time to kind of provide some of that mentorship as you go on and start researching your cases. Okay. All right. Well, everybody have a good night.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.